Good morning, students. Today we will be discussing the next part of the analysis of the piano teacher. In the last classes, we tried to look at the relationship between the mother and daughter and how it act, how the work act as a psychological study, and then later we analyzed the power relationship between two women and how Erika treats herself as a victim. Along with that, we discussed masochistic desires and how it projected her basic longing for a trusting bond. When we have discussed all these things, we tried to analyze the narcissistic personality disorder in Erika, and we looked at the language of the novel, which is very dark, enraged, and have a have an anguished emotional texture. Now we move to the next part. So this film, or I should say, I should begin with the novel. The novel is hailed as a virtuosic triumph and at the same time condemned as an obscenity. During its publication, many of the journals, many of those papers joked about its obscure Austrian communist feminist porn author. So that is how Alfred Jelinek was described. Austrian communist feminist porn author. And this division in the opinions of the people is very much understandable because when you read the novel, you will understand that it is sadistic, masochistic, incestuous, and voyeuristic at the same time. And in her Nobel Prize acceptance speech, this is what Jelinek said: is writing the gift of curling up with reality. One would so love to curl up, of course, but what happens to me then? What happens to those who don't really know reality at all? So, this piano teacher is reality as Jelinek sees it. It is dark, twisted, and grotesque. And here we see Jelinek parodying the traditional elements of a love story. We see the author substituting the poignant scenes for physical abuse and pure malice, which is very much underscored by a dark and pulsing sexuality. Here we see that one of the major themes of this work is gender politics. She portrays the sexes at their most raw and animalistic. There are these scenes of sexual conduct and the sheer savagery of the characters' desire, which actually serve to underline the senselessness of sanitizing female sexuality. And here we see Jelinek unflinchingly tracing the story of her protagonist, who is a woman with a complex, regressive, masochistic pathology, which is very much marked by primitive self destructiveness that even includes self mutilation, as you see how she mutilates herself, her own private parts. And she has these fantasies she got from all those pawn shops. And these beating fantasies actually push her towards a behavioral enactment with the student. So she gives a list of demands which exhibits, which reveals her beating fantasies. And later we see that she develops a kind of inhibitions against acting out. And we see that all those fantasies become weakened. And here she kind of develops a delicate balance of compromise formations. Here we see that the narrative flow with a dreamlike quality. There is this movement from one voice to another, from spoken word to thought, with no delineation between these forms. And this rhetorical device illustrates the porous boundaries, the transparent boundaries between mother daughter, inside out, inside and outside, reality and fantasy. And in fact, we see there is this obliteration of boundaries which pervades many of Erika's fantasies. Also, this work can be seen as a study in contradictions between appearances and reality. So there is this dark contrast to the idealized image that her mother has fabricated for Erika. She is seen as a delicate flower, the timid, frail, and aesthetic artist. And on the other side, so that is the idealized image this mother has fabricated for Erika. And there is this other side where we see the we see the inner life of Erika with all those perverse secret fantasies. So no one would suspect the music teacher of being the criminal. So there is this scene in a tightly packed train where she takes secret pleasure in kicking women's buttocks or pinching their legs, causing them to bruise. And we see she frequenting all those pawn shops where she sits in a booth and gaze at women, get mesmerized by their genitals. So, as I said earlier, the study is a contradiction between appearances and reality. And talking about the adaptation, these are the words of Michael Haneke. He says, I would like to be recognized for making in The Piano Teacher as obscenity, but not a pornographic film. Insofar as truth is always obscene, I hope that all of my films have at least an element of obscenity. It is said that the film's publicity at the time of its release included one widely circulated photograph of teacher and student, played respectively by Isabella Robert and Magmale, locked in a passionate embrace, as you see in the cover page of the novel. And in a single glance, that image allures of the romantic narrative for the film's potential audience. But later we understand the people who have watched the movie, it is said that they felt betrayed because the movie, as a novel, it deconstructs the very conventions of romance. And the role of music is important when you discuss the novel and the film. Here, music is foregrounded as a principal mechanism of enunciation and it operates at multiple narrative levels. It brings about a tension between ideal and the obscene, the ineffable and the corporeal, and it projects as a structuring polarity within the narrative. It is said that it functions both diegetically. Diegetically, it is something which becomes part of the narrative, unlike which happens externally. So here, music functions both diegetically in the description of repression and suffering, and structurally, it contributes as a key to comprehending the film's strategy to disrupt all those heterosexual romantic norms. So, the role of music is important. Will also provide a paper regarding the discussion of the role of music in piano teacher. And later we see all those rape scenes. It brings about disturbing images, can be considered alongside numerous other disturbing images of extreme violence that punctuate the film. And as you see that scene is captured in long static shots and that allow the intensity of the film, and it gives about a kind of a visceral effect of such sequences. Along with that, we see that pornography is introduced as a theme in the film's story. And when we see, as we discussed earlier, she is relishing some stolen hours. of relief from her routine musical teaching. So, the novel, as well as a movie, reflects upon the complex ways in which behaviors and roles can be repeated and adapted by individuals within and without traditional boundaries. So it can be said that it is a symbiotic spiral of action and repression, which is perpetuated by social norms and expectations, and thus it presents a compelling slice of life. So we should say that this work offers an unmediated exposure of human dichotomy. Here, Jelinek takes the readers to experience a kind of a walked experience of love and intimacy. Here we see the characters are jealous and greedy. Passion becomes obsession. Sex is, is filth or dirt. And affection, love, is violent. So, this work is visceral and pathologically unsentimental, which is considered to be an antidote, completely opposite to what you see in Hollywood romance. It offers no solution to the issues it presents. It has an open ending. It simply works unapologetically to strip the society to its core and expose the murkiness, the dirt that floats so close to the surface. And here, violence acts as a cleansing force and brings about an uncomfortable overtones of an Austria 50 years ago. So there is this element of fascism which took Austria during Nazi era. We see that although this Erika must change her situation from within, it is clear that her upbringing is responsible for her dilemma. And that upbringing is like the fascist authoritarianism associated with Austria in Nazi era. So, this is another important subject in the novel. That is the way in which fascism remains a part of contemporary Austrian society. While on the surface we see Erika representing the crowning achievement of a distinguished musical culture, Underneath, we see she become the servant of a cultural industry that serves to hide more pathological, social, and psychological problems underneath. So here we see that the Austrian world of high musical art is peeled back to expose all those perverse, sadomasochistic images of power and domination. Both Clemmer and Erika's mother can be seen as instances of the dark side of a culture that continues to produce fascistic personalities who go unrecognized. It is said that Jelinek's exposure of this continuing fascism of a society was accompanied by the attacks by the right wing, mainly by the right wing Austrian political leader Georg Hader, which only proved her point of historical denial and the failure to examine the fascistic structures that still permeate family and even male female relationships. So that's it, girls. So, this is a brief critical appreciation of the piano teacher. I will provide you some more materials. Please compile all those points. So I hope that I have discussed all the major points in the novel. I will give you extra materials. Please try to compile all these materials. So thank you, girls. Have a nice day.